The devastation caused by Russia's war on Ukraine is not isolated to Ukraine. It's making one of the world's most dire humanitarian and food crises even worse. Yemen has been a war zone since 2014. Iran-backed rebels are fighting the Saudi-backed government. Widely seen as a proxy war, the conflict has plunged the country into chaos. The numbers are staggering. 150,000 people have been killed. More than 23 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. That's 2/3 of the population. More than 16 million suffer from hunger, and more than 4 million have been displaced, 80% of them women and children. Thomas Sadoski is an American actor who recently visited Yemen. He was there as the founding ambassador of the humanitarian organization War Child. Sadoski got unprecedented access to the northern regions where journalists are largely prohibited. Thomas Sadoski, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
You were in Yemen a few weeks ago. Access to that country is extremely challenging right now. Why was it so important for you to go to Yemen in particular?
You know, I think that I have a sort of sense of responsibility anytime I see the that horrible phrase U.S.-backed attached to anything, and particularly when it comes to a situation like this that is such a dire situation, one that has been swept completely off of the front pages and almost doesn't really appear in a lot of discussion in the media or in politics anymore. And so, you know, as the situation continues to degrade, I feel like my level of responsibility to get over there and to bear witness and to bring those stories home grows.
The math of this crisis is horrible. More than 16 million people suffering from hunger. And the crisis that's been made worse by what's happening in Ukraine, which has accelerated food insecurity, food shortages, and food prices. So what are some of the main challenges in Yemen in terms of getting aid into that country, and how does Ukraine fit into that?
Well, I mean, you're right, first of all, that it is about 16 million people. I think it's a little bit closer to 17 at this point that are dealing with hunger. But the thing that's important to understand is that term food insecurity is sort of like it's a very convenient and very polite catch-all for what is probably should be more clearly stated as 17 million people starving to death. It's just they're doing it in a very, very, very slow, prolonged, horrifying way. 3.5 million of that 17 million are quite literally on the very verge of mortality. That includes breastfeeding mothers and children. There's another 6 million that are one step removed from that level of severity. And then the rest are in the sort of middle stages of famine and starvation. It's a number that sort of defies belief, but when you get on the ground and actually start to see this up close and you see the real insidious nature of this kind of hunger and this prolonged of a period of time. I mean, you're not talking about something that's happened in a very brief amount of time and a lot of people are dying very quickly. You're talking about actually something more horrifying than that, in which people are getting a little bit of food over prolonged periods of time, just enough to sustain life, but not enough to sustain growth or health. Part of the way that ties into Ukraine is that, yeah, Ukraine is sort of the breadbasket of that area, and the sanctions that have been put on, Ukrainian wheat being able to be shipped out has had a major impact, not just in Yemen, but in a lot of other places as well. It's just part and parcel of the sort of inhumanity of the sanctions that are happening over there, and the way in which the global community has, in many ways, failed to respond to one of the great crises. I mean, the United Nations refers to Yemen as the greatest humanitarian crisis in the world. There are ways that the rest of the world could respond to fill in that gap, and have done so to a certain extent, but really needs to do better.
Well, I wonder if you can pick up on that point, right? Because obviously, you know, with everything that is happening in Ukraine and marking the one-year anniversary of the full-scale Russian invasion, there's been this rush of financial aid, humanitarian aid, military aid for Ukraine. Yeah. But Yemen, kind of, as you say, kind of gets a bit forgotten. I mean, what more do you want to see the West do? What more do you think they should do to respond to this?
Well, again, I mean, I think that it's an interesting term, and not to, you know, certainly to correct you, but forgotten is one way to put it. Another way to put it is that it's just we're dealing with globally sanctioned murder at this point. You know, watching children starve to death can't be described any other way. if we've completely turned our back on that people, those people, then we all, as a global community, have some responsibility in their death. Let alone the military implications of us being over there. But just from a completely humanitarian point of view, you're talking about the United States government pumping anywhere between 50 and 80 billion dollars, depending on whose figures you're looking at, into Ukraine in the past year. They put $1 billion into Yemen. And people that I've talked to at USAID and within the federal government say that those cuts there are going to be cuts coming to that $1 billion of aid that went in there. So as the situation worsens, we're sending less. That's not forgotten. It's something else. I'll leave it to politicians to define what that is, but it certainly can't be considered any sort of adherence to any kind of humanitarian principles to do that. Now, I understand, and you've got to be very careful in these situations. You don't want to feel like you're getting into the atrocity Olympics, in which nobody wins. The people of Ukraine are suffering, and their suffering is no greater or lesser to be considered than anybody else's in the world. And that is true of the Yemeni people as well. How do we get aid in there? I think that, if we work just as hard at supporting the humanitarian efforts as we have worked on influencing the military efforts over there, you could see an extraordinary amount happen in a very short amount of time. There are aid organizations that are on the ground in Yemen that are doing very good work. I'm very proud to be affiliated with War Child USA and War Child Canada, which I can say from direct personal experience is doing very important, very worthwhile work on the ground over there. I was very impressed with the World Food Program. They're doing great work as well. They need support. Not only do they need support, they need logistical support, they need political support, they need people to show up in these negotiations so that they can do the work that they need to do. There is, a de facto embargo that's happening in the ports over there, whether folks are willing to acknowledge it or not, that is making it very difficult, not only to get aid into the country, to get medicine into the country, but it's making the fuel that it takes to get that aid around the country prohibitively expensive. And it's a very, very tricky situation. Yemen is already in a bad spot, but it is hanging on by a very thin thread from going into a place of truly, and it sounds hyperbolic, but it really isn't. We're very close to biblical levels of suffering over there. I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of children starving to death. That's a reality.
No, you're right, and don't be hesitant to correct me. Forgotten probably isn't the right word. Ignored may be the right word. Abandoned may be a better word. But I wonder, you were just there.
Yeah.
What's one moment or one image that sort of stood out with you that might really drive this home for people watching this interview?
I had the opportunity to talk to so many people while I was there, and it was my job. My responsibility was to go over there and to bear witness and to make the promises that I would carry the stories home that I'd heard. And it's not just the privation that's happening to children and in the food insecurity. There's an extraordinary amount of gender-based violence, and the women over there are being treated in ways that are absolutely unconscionable. And that's across the country, no matter which governmental group you're talking about. That is the universal. It's haunting. Everything about that trip is haunting. It's haunting to watch children die in front of you. And literally to see children, the color is leached out of their hair because they don't have any minerals in their body and these sort of extraordinary things happen that just devastate you. But the moment that really sticks out to me, I was sitting in a meeting with a group of women, one of whom was a doctor. In full abaya, black abaya, because just a couple days before we arrived, the edict had come down in the Houthi areas that women were no longer allowed to wear color. And she was sitting in her black abaya, doctor, and she had said to me, we fight 24 hours a day for survival. We fight when we wake up in the morning, all day, when we go to bed, and we fight in our dreams. And that resonated with me in a really, I think, profound way, because spending time in that country, you see the extraordinary courage and the extraordinary power of the civilian population in Yemen, but specifically its women. They make up the backbone of that country, of that society. It is the greatest natural resource that that country has, is the power and the courage of its women. And to see the humanity stripped away from them the way that it's being, and then to see the privation lumped on top of it, with them having to, not only the travel restrictions, the mahram travel restrictions where they have to bring a male family member with them everywhere they go, but go where? To do what? And for what? They have so little, and more is being taken away. It is a war on the entirety of humanity, the entirety of a person's humanity. Not only the physical degradation, but the emotional, psychological, and spiritual degradation of the entire human being is being affected over there, and it is devastating. To be present for it changes you, and it really impassioned me to make sure that I could come and let people know, hey, there are conflicts in the world, there is suffering in the world that we need to be paying attention to. We have responsibility. Not only the United States, but the Canadian government, Canadian citizens, American citizens, we have responsibility to those people, and it has to be recognized.
Well, Thomas Sadusky, you promised to bear witness and share stories. I want to thank you for sharing the story with us today.
Thank you for taking the time.